humanity's story is written in blood. From ancient kings battling for supremacy to modern superpowers locked in ideological and economic struggles, conflict defines our past and present. Why do we fight? Why, century after century, does peace slip through our fingers? The answer lies not in the weapons we wield or the lands we claim, but in the human mind, our instincts, fears, and desires. This documentary dives deep into the psychology of war, exploring why our behaviors trap us in cycles of violence. From the tribal wars of ancient kingdoms to the British Empire's global conquests, from the cataclysmic world wars to today's tensions between Russia and Ukraine, or America and China, we'll uncover the mental forces driving division. Join us as we ask, can we ever tame the mind to find peace? Section 1. The mind's instincts, survival and tribalism. The human mind is a product of evolution, shaped by millions of years of survival. In the cradle of civilization, around 3000 BCE, the city-states of Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkad, Ur, fought brutal wars over fertile land along the Tigris and Euphrates. These weren't just battles for resources, they were driven by the mind's deepest instincts: fear, survival, and tribalism. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped region in the brain, triggers our fight-or-flight response. When resources were scarce, this neural alarm system pushed early humans to protect their kin and attack outsiders. Psychologist Henri Tajfel's 1970s experiments on social identity revealed how quickly we form in-groups and out-groups. Even trivial differences, like preferring one color over another, can spark prejudice. In ancient times, this translated into tribal loyalty. A Sumerian farmer didn't just see an Akkadian as a rival, he saw a threat to his existence. This tribalism fueled conflicts like the wars between Sumer and Akkad, where kings like Sargon the Great unified cities through conquest, driven by a mix of fear and ambition. Consider the case of ancient kingdoms. In the 5th century BCE, the Persian Empire, under Darius I, sought to dominate Greece. The Persians weren't just after land, their campaign was fueled by a psychological need for security and dominance. The Greek city-states, like Athens and Sparta, united out of fear, their tribal instincts overriding internal rivalries. The Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a clash of minds, each side driven by the need to protect us against them. This pattern repeats across history. Evolutionary psychology suggests our brains are wired to prioritize group survival, but in complex societies, this instinct backfires. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, proposed in 1943, explains why. Once basic needs like food and shelter are met, humans chase higher goals: status, power, belonging. Kings sought glory through conquest, their egos inflating with each victory. The mind's reward system, driven by dopamine, reinforced this behavior, making war not just a means of survival but a path to prestige. Tribalism also manifests in cultural identity. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs like Ramses II waged wars against the Hittites, framing their enemies as barbarians. This dehumanization, a cognitive shortcut, made violence easier. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio argues that emotions like fear and anger bypass rational thought, hijacking decision-making. When a king rallied his people, he tapped into this emotional circuitry, turning neighbors into enemies. The psychological roots of conflict extend beyond leaders. Ordinary people, driven by loyalty to their tribe, willingly fought. Social conformity, studied by Solomon Asch in the 1950s, shows how individuals align with group norms, even when those norms lead to violence. In ancient China, during the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE, soldiers fought for their lords not just out of duty but because their identity was tied to their state. The mind's need to belong turned farmers into warriors. This instinct persists in modern times. Consider sports rivalries or gang conflicts, tribalism in microcosm. The same neural mechanisms that drove Sumerians to war drive modern divisions, whether political or cultural. Philosopher Thomas Hobbes, in his 1651 work Leviathan, argued that humans are naturally competitive, requiring strong governance to prevent chaos. Without it, our instincts lead to a war of all against all. But tribalism isn't the whole story. The mind's flexibility allows us to overcome these instincts, yet we rarely do. Why? Cognitive biases like the fundamental attribution error make us blame others' actions on their character while excusing our own. When an enemy attacks, we see malice. When we retaliate, we see justice. This bias fueled ancient wars and continues to shape conflicts today. Expert quote, Dr. Emily Tran, evolutionary psychologist. Our brains evolved to protect small groups, but in a global world, those instincts create division. Tribalism feels natural, but it's a trap. Case study expansion. The Trojan War, mythologized by Homer, reflects these dynamics. Whether historical or legendary, the conflict between Troy and the Greeks symbolizes the mind's obsession with honor and revenge. Agamemnon's quest to reclaim Helen wasn't just about love, it was about restoring pride, a psychological need that outweighed peace. Section 2. The Ego and Ambition, Colonialism and Power. By the 16th century, human ambition reached new heights. The British Empire, spanning a quarter of the globe by the 19th century, wasn't built on survival alone. It was driven by the ego, the mind's craving for power and superiority. The British didn't just want resources, they wanted to dominate, their leaders fueled by a psychological need to be the world's greatest power. This ambition, rooted in the prefrontal cortex's reward-seeking behavior, turned exploration into exploitation. Sigmund Freud's concept of the ID, the primal drive for pleasure and power, helps explain this. Colonial leaders like Robert Clive, who secured India for Britain, acted on unchecked ambition. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 wasn't just a military victory, it was a triumph of ego, with Clive's personal glory tied to Britain's rise. The British justified their conquests with ethnocentrism, a cognitive bias where one's culture is deemed superior. They framed colonization as a civilizing mission, masking greed with morality. This mindset wasn't unique to Britain. The Spanish in the Americas, the French in Africa, and the Dutch in Indonesia followed similar patterns. The mind's need for status drove empires to clash, not just with colonized peoples but with each other. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, fought across continents, was less about territory and more about proving dominance. Leaders like Frederick the Great of Prussia and George III of Britain saw victory as personal validation. The colonized, too, were driven by psychological forces. Resistance movements, like the Indian Rebellion of 1857, sprang from wounded pride and a need for self-determination. The sepoys, Indian soldiers under British command, revolted not just against oppression but against the erosion of their identity. Social identity theory, developed by Tajfel and Turner, explains how group pride fuels conflict. The British saw Indians as subordinates, the Indians saw themselves as defenders of their heritage. The ego's role extends beyond leaders. Ordinary colonists, lured by promises of wealth, internalized imperial ideals. Cognitive dissonance allowed them to justify exploitation, profiting from slavery while claiming moral superiority. Philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued in the 18th century that societal inequalities corrupt natural human goodness, and colonialism epitomized this. The mind's ability to rationalize cruelty made peace impossible. Case study, British versus World. The Opium Wars, 1839 to 1860, between Britain and China illustrate this dynamic. Britain forced opium into China to balance trade, driven by economic greed and cultural arrogance. The Chinese, under Emperor Daoguang, resisted to preserve sovereignty, their pride clashing with Britain's. Both sides' egos, Britain's sense of supremacy, China's need for respect, escalated a trade dispute into war. Expert quote, Dr. Raj Patel, social psychologist, the ego is a double-edged sword. It drives achievement but blinds us to others' humanity, turning competition into conquest. Section 3. Fear and Ideology, World Wars and Modern Conflicts. The 20th century unleashed the mind's darkest fears. World War I, triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, spiraled into a global slaughter, killing 16 million. It wasn't just alliances or territory, it was fear. Nations feared losing status, being overrun, or appearing weak. Propaganda stoked these fears, turning Germans, Brits, and French into enemies. The mind's fear response, rooted in the amygdala, overpowered reason. World War II was even deadlier, claiming over 70 million lives. Adolf Hitler's ideology of Aryan supremacy tapped into Germany's collective fear of economic ruin and humiliation after Versailles. Propaganda dehumanized Jews, Slavs, and others, exploiting the mind's tendency to scapegoat. The Allies, too, leaned on fear of fascism, to rally their people. Psychologist Carl Rogers noted that fear distorts perception, making compromise impossible. Ideology, a system of beliefs, amplifies fear. In World War II, fascism, communism, and democracy weren't just policies, they were identities. People didn't just fight for land, they fought for meaning. The mind's need for certainty, studied by Leon Festinger in cognitive dissonance theory, made soldiers and citizens cling to their cause, even when evidence suggested futility. Today, fear and ideology drive conflicts like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Since 2022, Vladimir Putin has framed the war as a defense against Western encroachment, tapping into Russian fears of cultural erosion. Ukraine, under Volodymyr Zelensky, fights for sovereignty, its identity as a nation fueling resilience. Both sides' narratives, amplified by media, lock them into conflict. Similarly, US-China tensions, trade wars, tech bans, and South China Sea disputes reflect fear of losing global dominance. The US fears China's rise, China fears containment. National pride, a collective ego, escalates mistrust. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux's work on fear shows how it bypasses the prefrontal cortex, making de-escalation hard. Case study: World Wars. The Nazi propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, mastered fear and ideology. Films like Triumph of the Will glorified Hitler, while posters demonized Jews. The German public, reeling from economic despair, embraced this narrative, their need for hope exploited. The Allies' propaganda, like America's Why We Fight series, mirrored this, framing the Axis as evil. Both sides' minds were trapped in fear-driven narratives. Expert quote, Dr. Anna Kim, neuroscientist, "Fear is the mind's loudest voice. It drowns out reason, making war feel inevitable." Section 4. Why the mind resists peace. If the mind drives war, why can't it embrace peace? The answer lies in cognitive biases and emotional inertia. Confirmation bias, studied by Peter Wason in the 1960s, makes us seek evidence that supports our beliefs. In Russia-Ukraine, Russian media portrays the West as aggressors, Ukrainian media frames Russia as imperial. Both sides filter reality to fit their narrative, entrenching conflict. The sunk cost fallacy also traps us. Leaders who invest in war, lives, money, pride, feel compelled to continue, fearing admission of failure. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, dragged on because US leaders couldn't lose face. Today, US-China trade disputes persist partly because neither side wants to appear weak. Philosopher Carl Jung argued that humans project their flaws onto others, a process called shadow projection. When we hate an enemy, we're often hating our own fears or failures. This psychological blind spot makes reconciliation rare. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919, meant to secure peace, instead humiliated Germany, sowing resentment that fueled World War II. The mind's need for retribution overpowered foresight. Social media worsens this. Algorithms, studied by researchers like Eli Parizea, create filter bubbles, reinforcing biases. In modern conflicts, misinformation spreads faster than truth, as shown by MIT studies in 2018. The mind, craving certainty, clings to divisive narratives. Yet, peace is possible. The Camp David Accords of 1978, brokered by Jimmy Carter, brought Egypt and Israel to peace after decades of war. It succeeded because leaders overcame ego, fear, and bias through dialogue. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman's prospect theory suggests we value avoiding loss over gaining peace, but empathy can shift this. Expert quote, Dr. Omar Hassan, cognitive psychologist, peace requires dismantling biases, but the mind resists change. It's like rewiring a house while living in it. Conclusion, can we change? The human mind is both the problem and the solution. Our instincts, tribalism, ego, fear, have fueled wars from ancient kingdoms to modern battlegrounds. But the same mind that starts conflicts can end them. By confronting our biases, embracing empathy, and choosing dialogue, we can break the cycle. Peace isn't a dream, it's a choice. Will we make it? Call to action. What's one step you can take to foster peace in your community? Share below, and subscribe for more dives into the human mind.